Oh wait, we're not recording this, are we? Didn't we decide not to do the workshops on recording?
I don't have to post it.
If you want to pass these around, hashtag.
I think we were going to do.
Okay, so you just take two and pass them.
I think we're going to play it
okay.
here.
So great. So welcome back, guys. Sorry, I didn't mean to exclude you, workshop guys, if you were listening to all of that. This is kind of the workshop section of the of Cake. And for those of you who new, we pretty much just take a little sample business and hold it up and kind of work through some of the things that you might think about if you're launching an ad. Is there anyone here who's actually interested in kind of taking the hot seat and like volunteering to hop in here and kind of dissect what might go into making an ad? Otherwise, we can tear apart or even just do some Q&As with some of the float-on ads that we run as well. Anyone super stoked on hopping in and running an ad soon that wants some feedback or wants to get into it? Okay, cool. In that case, let's tear apart this back page of the Reader's Choice ad that I had. Or actually, let's do some tales from the tanks to take a look at that and see what that might look like. And I guess as long as we're dealing with it, and since this is one of the first times we've had a workshop where people didn't volunteer for it, we'll also kind of highlight Cake and what Cake might do.
Yeah, and we can also maybe go into step-by-step of like 2 best practices, so maybe step-by-step of a good Craigslist ad versus a step-by-step of
Sure, yeah, that sounds good. So let's just start walking through this, and we'll kind of do a 2-step for each of these, and feel free to like jump in and ask questions and stuff like that too, because I already gave my talk. Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is where other people get to like, this is the interactive part. So, and if you're content listening to my voice on about advertising, then by all means just sit there. Otherwise, like, definitely hop in with anything at any point.
And if you have insight that we haven't touched upon, that's also again what we're here for. So
yeah, totally.
It's the knowledge exchange part.
Yeah. So the first part of this is just what media do your customers use? You might have a guess. In Portland, it's a really likely bet that most people are reading the Mercury or the Willamette Week, for example. It's really likely that a lot of people are going on Google to search for things or going on Google Places. It's a really likely thing that people are going on Yelp to leave reviews. If you have more of a niche business, there's like, for instance, a food cart. There's specific food cart blogs that go on in Portland. If you have something that's even email marketing related, like there's tons of email marketing blogs, and there's places where email marketers go for information. And you know these because you use them yourself, because you're engaged in your business. So just make a list of all of those and start looking into what it would take to get an ad there. And then the next step is, let's just like use Float On as an example, and then Cake as an example of that. So Float On, the things that we know that people get us through TripAdvisor. We're rated number like 11 in Portland on TripAdvisor out of like 300 attractions pretty much, which is absurd. It goes like the Columbia Gorge and the Japanese Gardens, and then like Float On. It's really ridiculous. So that's a really solid one. Like, we know that people find us through TripAdvisor, and they tell us that all the time. People tell us all the time they find us through word of mouth, and so we've centered a lot of our attention just on word of mouth marketing. We know, like I said, people go to the Mercury, and so we've used the Merc Perks. We know that people who go to Thrillist from just, like, we didn't know that people who are customers of Float On use Thrillist. We just kind of guessed, because our customers are anyone, really. That's the nice thing about the Float On business is our demographics range across the board, so pretty much any venue. It's really good for us. Cake, as a good example. Business journals are a really good place to hit up. There's actually a fair amount of good business activity going on around. Meetup scene in Portland is pretty good. Even just going face-to-face and meeting people at different small business events ends up working really well for us. And we have not done any Merc Perk stuff, mainly because this is all donation-based, so we don't have as much that we can trade for a Merc Perk service to see how that goes. But that might be a really good option as well. There are also just a lot of blogs of really active people, like Mixergy is a really good podcast I listen to, for example. And advertising on there costs a decent amount, so I probably wouldn't get it. But I'd write that down as my list of potential channels. And Mixergy has guests on all the time that are from Portland, because it turns out Portland has a really robust internet startup scene randomly, which is great. So write down that list for each. What's their motivation when they're listening and reading to it? So something like Mixergy does every day, 5 days a week, it does an hour-long interview with different entrepreneurs. The people listening to that are listening for really scrappy tips. They're listening for business advice that's relevant to them. They're listening just for like encouragement if they hit a rough spot, for like knowing that they can get through this thing. And they're listening for recommendations of good services to use. And the way he does it is much more like that old radio sponsorship method, where he chooses 2 or 3 sponsors and just personally does a like little shtick on them, recommends them, says like he uses them, he wouldn't recommend anything he didn't use personally, which is great. So for something like that, you know, if Cake was going in there, we'd really pitch ourselves, give some kind of useful information during his recommendation, like, yeah, we really support these Cake guys, here's what they recommend if you're trying to do this. And really try to hit all of those points. Like, they want a recommended service, they want good information that's actually useful to them, and they want to know that they can get through this, and this will, you know, work for them, and kind of maybe even tell a little, like, success story of different Cake people, so that it gives them a little encouragement, and really hit that. If they're reading the Mercury, they're looking for it because it's hilarious, and it has really, like, not, like, edgy, I'll say, like, edgy, entertaining material, or they want to know what to do around town. Like, those are the 2 reasons I read the Mercuries. Like, I have 5 minutes to kill and I want to read, like, the, you know, Savage Love or something like that and just be entertained, or I want to find out what to take the girl that I'm dating to do for the weekend because, you know, I have, like, 3 hours free from the crazy business work that I do and I want to make the most of it, and I'm like, oh, what's going on this weekend? So anything that we put in the Mercury, we target towards, you know, if people are reading it, I'd say make sure that your ad is edgy and entertaining, or make sure that it specifically announces an event or something going on that people can take advantage of. And if you're doing anything that isn't those 2, then you're probably not going to get a great response rate from the ad because it's not context driven. What don't people know about your industry or product that you think that they should? And so this is totally separate from what we've been thinking of, just like as a separate little brainstorm. Let's go through and figure out what people don't know. So business-wise, I would say one thing that people don't know, like for Cake, if we were advertising this, is that most business advice that you read is rehashed from the 1950s and comes out of the Industrial Revolution and mass manufacturing and like wartime strategies. And that like our current advertising system is so different from that. But if you pick up your standard marketing book, that's what you're going to find is advice for 50 years ago. And maybe you should come and learn some new advice. What else don't they know? Well, it's like really general, right? And the more general it is, the less that people believe you. So you want to get in, you get really specific, and you say like, hey, we have run this ad, and we have made this post on Facebook. This one brought in a ton of people. Contact us to find out how you can do the same thing. Something like that might be even better. What else don't people know about the small business world? They don't know who to trust. Is one thing I found. Like, there's so many sources out there for small business information, like actually choosing one out and how to choose it. So that's kind of like getting into that mechanic type ad again, where you want to show like on Craigslist, where they're just confronted with this giant list of resources they can go to. And what you really want to give them maybe is advice for how to choose the right resource for you. And of course, like as you're guiding them through that, you make sure that all the checkpoints that you hit are for Cake in this case, right? Like it's like, oh, like the business resource should be at least free to try out. Like, it's donation-based. You can download all of our things online. Like, oh, well, it should actually be made by people who are running their own businesses. Okay, great. Like, these people actually do run their own businesses, and, like, you know, you don't want to give people advice to, like, choose a competitor, or, like, hopefully giving them that advice for, like, oh, we don't do any of these things. We should really get our game in order, I guess, is the alternative to that. And then how can you present the information that you want in the style that will satisfy their motivation? So, if you're going to do a Mercury ad for Cake, you want to make sure that it's edgy, that it announces an event, and that it provides this information about why you're different from your standard event, or your standard information you're providing. And there you go. Like, you've just crafted your ad. So that's the little checklist I go through whenever I'm thinking about doing any kind of print ad or any kind of ad anywhere. It's like, who's going to see it? Why are they going to see it? Like, what are they doing there in the first place that we're distracting them from? What do I want to get across? And how can I make sure that I get it across in a way that isn't actually distracting them from their content? It's actually just adding to it. They get another article that's exactly what they were reading anyway, giving them information in the style that they wanted it, only it's talking about us. And that really should be the goal of whatever it is that you're doing. Is this good, like, walking through this stuff? Is this helpful still, and kind of, like, as a useful kind of... Okay, good. Just making sure that I wasn't just, like, going off here and boring people. Okay.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, okay. I feel like I'm a little out of touch with what people are reading that might grab their interest, like the Mercury. I mean, I love Anna Romano. Cracks me up. That's about as far as I get, though. Does she still write that first in 2 pages, that week thing? But anyway, so for what I was going to do, appealing to people that are reading and looking at the meetups and the thrill lists, and they're not new terms to me, but I don't even know what to say to get their attention.
Sure. Okay, so that's a good question.
My information's valuable, and they can make more money, or just enrich their lives, or just learn something, you know. But
Sure. So the question then was just how, like, so okay, we know some outlets to go through, and we know where we might reach some of our customers. So was that, like, you kind of know what your customers read, or was part of the question just even like what venues to go through to reach them?
Well, if I were to advertise, yeah. I didn't think about advertising in the local paper. It never occurred to me.
So there's that's a really good question. And then so the second part of that was, once you do know where you want to advertise, if you like do know kind of where people might be looking, how do you even know what to write for it? Like, how do you know how to actually call people's attention? And so there's two things that I would look back on for Cake for that. I'm just going to our website, which will go a lot more into depth, and I'll give you a short answer as well.
Sure.
But we have one worksheet / presentation on there for a touch of design, is what it's called. And that talks a lot about just graphic design and how to craft something that looks visually appealing, and where to place things, like where our attention immediately goes just biologically, like what parts of the page and where to put things on those pages, where you should have calls to action, where you should have your little testimonials, you know, that sort of thing. So that's like visually how you should lay things out. Is covered in that. And then killer copywriting, I think, was the other one that we have on there, which is just goes through basically a lesson on how you should write good copy, what people want to hear, and then a checklist of points to make sure that you actually hit when you're writing things down. So once you have, go through that and figure out what you want to write, and then go through the design and figure out how you want to lay it out. And those two earlier Cake workshops should actually help a lot with that one. Okay. But the gist of both of those is going back to this, like, what should it look like and what should you say? Like, read through whatever it is that you're going to be publishing in. If you're publishing in, like, a traveler's magazine, or in some kind of, like, that goes into the hotel rooms, and it's like, Portland Travelers, or whatever it is that you're publishing, and, like, read the rest of those articles. See what font they use, and kind of, like, try to match it up online. See what tone they use, and try to match that tone in what you're writing. You really want to cater, because that's what the audience likes. Like, that's why they're getting a subscription to this, or why they're reading is because they like the tone. This publication is already set up. And that's what they're expecting to get. And the more you differ from that, the more resistance you're going to encounter. So matching to whatever it is that you're advertising in is really important.
It also depends. You can also utilize local copywriters. There are copywriters out there that can sit down and do a 30-minute interview with you, get your tone, and then can match it up with the tone with whatever advertising you're going to go after. So you don't necessarily. I'm not the greatest writer in the world, right? But I know what I want to get across. I know what points I want to solve. And you can usually sit down with someone and explain what you want to get across, what your goal is, what pain points you're trying to solve. And you can hire that out. There are people out there that'll work for that. It's just finding those right connections.
It's very true.
Also online, somebody wants to know if your t-shirt is a semi with rabbit ears on.
So it's actually more like a rabbit with semi wheels attached to it. It's called, so this is from threadless.com, little plug. Feel free to send me money, Threadless. And this is called Hru-Doo-Doo, the New Guy, which is a Watership Down reference, which is probably my favorite book in the entire world. Okay, so that tackles that t-shirt question.
Okay, back to the...
And totally right, too. The nice thing, so a lot of the stuff that I was talking about, the Cake resources, direct you for, if you are doing this yourself and if you don't want to spend money on these extra services, how to do it. That said, there are a lot of things, like, they will tell you, like, you can find people who will tell you what advertising space to buy that will, like, help your audience, and you can find people who will write copy for that advertising and make it good. The trick is there's an equal amount of people who say they will write good advertising copy and actually won't. Or it'll sound good to you, but it won't actually bring in customers. And so, how do you tell the difference? That's also where those other worksheets that we put out there come in handy. Like, if you just read through this copywriting checklist and ask someone to tell you what they're going to put in your copy or how they structure it, and it doesn't match up with a lot of those things, like, the checklists are not my opinion on things. Like, a lot of things are. The design and copywriting is just conventional wisdom conveyed to people. So if they're differing from a lot of that design or copywriting wisdom and you just have those sheets in front of you, like, do not go with them. That's, like, just standard practice, like, best practices is what comes across in there. So just having that base is really nice, too. If you're still like, I don't want to write, like, 300 words and figure out how to craft it to bring in the right people, like, interview.
I can't do everything.
Yeah, right. Interview 4 or 5 people. Pay them like, I don't know, what would you say, like 50 to 100, 50 to like.
It depends.
Yeah, 300. I mean, yeah, and some copywriters are like, national campaigns. They charge tens of thousands of dollars just for like a single paragraph.
Yeah, you go with an agency that'll,
Sure.
screw you over.
Based on my experience, I'd say like, depending on whether you're going with a friend or like an actual kind of freelance person, probably between like $50 and $300 for like some decent copywriting for something would be what I'd pay.
Yeah.
As a little advice, and then you just kind of go through, interview some people, and use that as a reference, and now you know like what to actually judge them on, hopefully.
Yeah, cool.
And that's it. So the other part of that is just actually what to look for. Calls to action. Like in any advertising, if it's really small, it needs 1 call to action. If it's any bigger, probably like 2 or 3 calls to action. Establishing expertise is another big one. So you never want to write something down and just say like, I am the best, without like having at least a quote from someone saying that, yes, this person is the best. Or like, yes, this person teaches these workshops, or yes, this person, whatever it is that they do, you need to establish some kind of expertise, and then you need to tell them to do it. Like, this person says I say I'm great, this person says I'm great, here, do it. It's like the basic level of what you want to put on there. Another nice tip too, which I meant to cover during the last section, I was just reading on different psychology and like activations of the brain for different things, and there are some things that print advertising is still actually way better than internet advertising on, which is really interesting. And one of those is emotional engagement with images. So if you're doing a print advertisement in anything with glossy pages specifically, like a magazine, or in this case like the back cover of this guide, actually they just told us it wasn't going to be glossy, which is why we switched to not having any photographs on there. But glossy images, apparently, like they're just so vivid and like so shiny and right in front of us, like our emotional connection with them goes way up. So if you're ever doing print advertising in like a magazine or something with glossy pages, use high-def photographs and really nice things like that. If you're doing it in a newspaper, write it like a newspaper article, or write it like they do it. You can use images and photographs too, but just make it look like, a newspaper article. If you're writing, like we were just talking too, I think obviously it's different. You can run tests for what works, but if you're writing an email newsletter, it doesn't hurt to actually write an email newsletter like you'd write an actual email and have that go out as well. I'm just kind of thinking of the context that they're viewing it in, what people are going to be the most comfortable with is really, I think, what goes into it. Same for content, right? Like if you get an email that's super businessy and not like what you normally want to be checking your email for, you're way less likely to be reading it. If you hit an ad in a newspaper that's like not actually good content, you're way less likely to read that too. So I don't know, that was kind of rambly, but hopefully it answered some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
So we went over a couple of these examples already, so I won't go into them. This kind of Craigslist idea of the ad, this idea of the newspaper quarter page ad that you actually take out as a column. And then the homework that I had, let me actually check the time and see how we're doing on that. 7:43, great. So things that you can immediately hop into, like I said, Merc Perks are a great one. I highly recommend that, just to try it out and see what works for that. Thrillist is great. Also brochures and zines, which we didn't really talk about, and as long as I have some extra time here, I'll go into a little bit. So these can be for Float On, for example, all we have is this Beginner's Guide to Floating as advertisement for us, and this is essentially all the paid advertisement we do. Everything else, we do for barter. We also don't use business cards. This is the only, if someone wants information about us, they have to pick this up. And you'll notice, nowhere on the front even does it say Float On. This isn't the typical kind of brochure that you'll see, and when you open it up, you'll not find our business really mentioned in here, except to say when you come in. To us, it's implied. But there's no information on us. Same for this inside panel, and then only when you get to the back can you find actual Float On contact information. And the goal with that is to just actually educate people. So if you are putting out brochures and you are putting out, or a zine, or even, like I said, with advertisements, really providing that intelligent, informative information. Like I feel like people are way more likely to pick this up and be more receptive to it for the fact that it doesn't say like Float On's Beginner Guide to Floating. It's just like, no, if you want to know about floating, this is it. Highly accessible right there, like not advertising. If all they did was read the inside and set it down, they'd never even know about us, and I don't even care, because they'd find out about floating, and through that they'd find out about us. But you can do this with very cheap. Like we order these online, and we order them by the 5,000s, and I think it costs us about $600 or $700 total, depending on the discount sales, to get that many. We order from psprint.com, which from what I found is like there's a lot of different print places. That's just a really generic one. They don't charge very much, and they're higher quality than things like Vistaprint. They're kind of like the best, like cheap / decent printing I found. So psprint.com. That said, you can just go to a copy shop and print out black and white copies of something / print them out on your own computer for really cheap. We have another guide that is half this size, that's a trifold this big, and we just print it out upside down on the other side. So we get twice as many guides for half as much if you can actually condense down information. And that's really, other than the cost of pretty much like cutting and folding in an ink cartridge, which is almost nothing, you can print out a ton of guides that are actually informative and start teaching people about your industry. Like if you wanted people, like if you were opening up a new coffee roasters, that's some alternative, different like Starbucks and Pete's and even Stumptown around town, you could produce a little guide that's just your average Joe's, average Joe's guide to the best coffee beans. And you just put that around coffee shops and actually have it as an intelligent, specifically coffee shops that are well geared towards nice, high quality, free, good work trade practices coffee, and put that around, and you're probably going to hit a lot of people, and they'll find out about your coffee, and you'll have actually informed them about something useful. So that's kind of my guide for brochures / seeds. I think they're incredibly useful. I would suggest even we did, and ditch other ways for people to contact you so they have to get that guide or that brochure if they want to pick it up. And consider that too as a nice way to test it. And what I would say too is a good thing to do is use the, I call it, I'm sure that he picked it up from somewhere, but I call it the Timothy Ferris model of testing, which is you, so good. So for testing cover design for his books, which I've talked about before, it's one of my favorite stories. He just went into a Barnes & Noble and designed different book covers and put them on other books that weren't his and just set them out on a table and sat in a chair and just made little tally marks next to how many people picked up each cover. And that's where he did his market testing to figure out which cover people were most likely to pick up and read. So brochures can also provide a really nice area for market testing too. You put out brochures that have different images or different catchphrases on the cover, and just sit in the coffee shop you just set them out at and see which people or who picks up the brochures and how many. And pretty soon you've not only just gotten your information out there, you've also done some really useful testing, and you can see what phrases and what images work best for you. And in general for advertising, that's another thing I didn't talk about because we've talked about it so much with cake so far, but there's no reason you shouldn't turn everything into a test. As long as you're going to release one ad, you might as well decide the next month, release the same ad in the same paper and make a different one and see how that responds differently to it. Treat every chance that you have with public announcements going out as a chance to also change it up and get at least some different sources of feedback coming in so you can tell what works better. Is another way to think about that too. And that's pretty much it. That walks through a lot of the worksheet. The things I didn't cover in this, we already talked about in the actual talk. Things like the story of the ad, making sure to tie it into an overall story, the example of Craigslist, and making that Craigslist ad, how to choose a good Craigslist ad, and then the example of the quarter-page ad also. And I'm just saying this out loud again for our internet audience so they know what we're skipping over. Actually buying yourself a column was the only other things on this that we didn't really talk about. And that's pretty much it. We'll call it a 10-minute early cake. Unless you guys have questions or anything else you just kind of wanted to toss out there, or if there are any resources you guys use for advertising or that you found useful that I haven't covered so far.
Well, I'm just getting started, but I thought that it was very enlightening.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Great ideas, and you guys have a really cool thing going. Thanks for letting people drop in. I really appreciate it. Because just definitely write down some great ideas. Stuff. It's like a flotation moment for me being in this room. No, seriously, I don't have a million other things to do. It's kind of the same idea and just a little more crowded, but
awesome.
But the same kind of thing. Really cool generation, I thought. So
well, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Awesome.
And all of this will be recorded online too. So if you missed anything or just want to go review it, feel free to hop back on there and view the videos anytime too. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming out. And we'll probably hang out for another half an hour at least and just kind of drink a couple beers and chat for a while too. Yeah.
It's our second language.
Exactly. Beer is our second language. It's true.
Start a beer con too.
Awesome. Are we off the air?